Right, so this is basically the first video that will guide you through the process of setting up the template, and I will try to explain things, and maybe at times you will find that I'm going into too much detail or that I'm repeating myself, but in such case just bear with me because I know that there are people who really need this. And on the other hand, if it's the other case, in case you find I'm going too fast or you don't understand something, then basically all I'm saying is described and explained in even more detail in the wiki. So if you're unsure about something or you just missed something, then just follow the wiki, because I'll be basically following it step by step through these videos, and it's all here, and it's always up to date. So just in case I haven't updated this video and I updated the template and there are some new things, if something is different, then just check the wiki, because that should always be up to date. So here I've explained what media template is, and I've talked about this in the introduction video. So here is some basic terminology that you will need, and a terminology that I will use in these videos and in the wiki. I will not talk about these because it's beyond what I want to talk about here. And if you're unsure what any of this is, then if you click this, there's a link to Wikipedia, which should explain this word, what it is. So if, for example, you don't know what CSS is, then just click that, and here you have an explanation of what a CSS file is, and Then other things, basically you will definitely need to know what an FTP is, and you should be able to use an FTP client. Now, one that I recommend is called FileZilla. It's this. And it's the one I use. It works on all operating systems, so that includes Windows, Mac, and Linux. It's a freeware software. I think it's even open source, so you can download it on the internet. There's even a link to the download page, and use that to transfer files from your PC. So when you download the template, when you download a plugin, a block, you're going to download it to your PC. And then you can use FileZilla to actually upload these files to your server. Next thing is English. Okay, now the template as such, in other words, your page, there's already over 25 languages available, and you will choose your default one, but the user can actually change this even on your site using a cookie. So the template is in all different languages. However, not so the documentation. The documentation, in other words, this wiki and the blog and these videos as well, are obviously only in English. I do speak Czech, obviously, that's my mother tongue, but I will make all these documentations and videos in English because that's the language, it's my second language, but it's the one that I'm most familiar with, and obviously it's the one that most people will understand. If you're struggling with this, then all I can say is try to use Google Translator, or try to watch these videos, which maybe if you see it on screen, you will be able to understand what's going on. If not, then you can try emailing me, and I do get emails in Italian and Spanish, which are languages that I have absolutely no clue about. And I then try to use Google Translator to at least get the meaning of your email, and I will try to answer you. So if you have any problems, you can do that, of course. But I do not even plan on translating the wiki to English, simply because I change this very often. Every time I update the plugin, update the template, there's likely to be some changes, so it would just be too complicated to maintain several versions of the wiki up to date, and so you'll just have to deal with English. Last thing is text editor, or rather I should call this code editor. This is not so relevant anymore, but in case you want to edit any of the scripts or you want to view them, then you should not use the built-in Windows Notepad. because that program actually inserts some unwanted characters. So this was the way you set up the template in the previous versions. However, in the current version, in other words 11 and above, everything is done via a graphical user interface, which means that you will never actually have to go to the code. You can set up everything, as you will see later. You can set up everything via a control panel, which this template provides, and you can do it directly from your browser. So you don't need to go to the code. But just in case you want to, then I highly recommend you use some code editor, and there are quite a few, and quite a lot of them are freeware. I used to use the Notepad++. That was the one that I used to use before. Now I usually use either Atom. Atom is another freeware code editor, and it looks like this. This is Atom. It's slightly more sophisticated, but it's really up to you. And the last one I use quite often these days too is called Visual Studio Code, and it's quite similar to Atom, but I find that it takes less resources, it takes less RAM. So Atom can sometimes be quite heavy. So yeah, it's really up to you, but don't use the default Notepad. Don't use the default Notepad for Windows, because that could cause some problems, especially with encoding and stuff like that. So either use Notepad++ or Atom or Visual Studio Code. But there are other ones such as PSPad, PHP Storm, NetBeans, and you name it. So what are the prerequisites for using this template? Well, obviously you need a weather station. You need a weather station, and that weather station has to be somehow connected to your PC or a device such as a media bridge, which is basically like a small router, which will send the data to the internet. So one thing that you need to understand is that this is not a desktop application. This is not a program that you download on your PC and it's like an exe file that you just run and install on your PC and it runs on your PC. No, all this is a web application, which means it all runs from a browser and it's saved on your server. So you will need a weather station connected to your PC or a media bridge, and that will send data to the internet, because this web application, this template, cannot communicate directly with your station. You need some other intermediate means of getting the data from the actual station, and there are quite a few programs. There's, for example, Weather Display, which is a very good one. Another good one is Cumulus, WeatherView, and there's WeatherCat, WeWix, WeatherView, and as I named, Media Bridge, which works slightly differently, but it's also a possibility. And I also have plugins which allow you to use data from your station if you upload your data to Weather Underground, WeatherLink, or the NetAtmo API. Although I want to say that you should only use this if you have really no other choice. So if, for example, you're using Weather Display and you're also sending data to Weather Underground, then you should use Weather Display. Simply because if you used Weather Underground, it would work, but you're actually introducing an extra intermediate, and if Weather Underground is down or it's not working as it's supposed to, then even though your Weather Display and your station data is still fine, you won't see any data in your template because Weather Underground was down, and it's also slowing it down. So you should take the direct route, in other words, use Weather Display to update the template, and you'll see later on how to do that. Likewise with WeatherLink, if you're using the data station, then if you can use other way, in other words, if you can use a direct route through, for example, Media Bridge or Media Stick, then use that instead of the WeatherLink plugin, because it's always more reliable. Domain and server. So you have two options. Either you can use your own server, and I'm sure that if you are using your own server, then you know what I'm talking about, because you are probably familiar with these things. My template is totally fine to run locally, although the only problem is that obviously in case you run into some difficulties, then having your template locally, it means that I cannot have a look at it. So quite often I get questions from people and saying, this doesn't work, and I say, okay, well, send me a link. And obviously, when I can see what's happening, I can easily diagnose what the problem could be. Or in case I can't, I might ask you for your password for the template so that I can actually try to set it up for you or look at what you did. However, if you're using it locally, this obviously is not possible. So that might be the only problem with running this locally, but otherwise, there are quite a few people using this on their own PC locally, not having their site public. But you know what? I think that why not making it public? It's really up to you. I just want to say that it is possible. The other option is that so you can have your own server and have it locally, or you can have your own server and actually make your site public. That's obviously an option too. Or you can use an external web hosting. This is something I use as well. And I want to say that given I use an external web hosting, I'm not a server expert. So if you ask me something about server setup, I will try to answer you, but I cannot guarantee because I myself don't understand servers very much. So this is something that I might not be able to help you with. People often ask, is it possible to use a free hosting? Theoretically, yes. However, in my experience, most free web hosting providers have very limited features. They provide very limited possibilities. For example, first of all, you need to check that there is PHP support. And some web hostings don't even have that. And if you don't have that, then there's absolutely no way you can use this template. If you do have PHP support, next thing you need to check is that you have MySQL support. MySQL is the database. It's a database that saves all your data. So you need support for that too. And the last thing you need to check is that even if you have both of these, sometimes these free web hostings, they have very low limits for these databases. So for example, I've seen even a database and the maximum size being 20 megabytes, which means that that's going to be enough for maybe half a year or a year. But after that, your database is going to be full and you will not be able to save more data. So, and also, it's usually the case that free web hosting is very slow. That's not to say it's not possible, and there are people who I know that use free web hosting and they have media template installed on free web hosting and it works. So it's just that there's for example 1&1, but there are others where you can find hosting for as little as $1 per month for the first year, which gives you enough time to test it, and then you can decide if you want to continue or not. So we've talked about PHP support and the MySQL database. Now, with regards to license, you can just read this. One thing I want to emphasize is that this is totally non-commercial, and I also emphasize that you should only use this for non-commercial purposes. In other words, you should not put any ads to media template. There are no ads by default, so you would have to add them yourself. But please do not use any Google AdWords or AdSense or any of that. Don't put any banners on your site. And there are several reasons. Now, one is that I'm not a big fan of this, and you're getting this as a freeware or donationware, so it just feels natural that you should use this as freeware too. So you should not be making money out of something that I created. But that's not actually the main reason, okay? It's not just because I don't want you to use commercials, like banners and stuff like that. The main reason, and I want to emphasize this, the main reason is that there are libraries used by the template that are only free for non-commercial purposes. And I will give you an example. One example is the HighCharts library. The HighCharts library is a JavaScript library for creating graphs. And all graphs you see in the template are using this library. However, this library is free only if you use it for non-commercial purposes. So if you decide you want to put banners on your site, then that's fine. However, you should then make sure that you purchase a license for HighCharts. and that might be a problem because it's not very cheap. You have to renew it every year, and that's not actually the only library that is only free for non-commercial purposes. So if you decided you want to put ads on your site, then that means you would have to pay quite a lot for all these licenses. So I created this template using freeware libraries, using freeware scripts, which are absolutely okay to use for free, but only if you're using the template for non-commercial purposes. So that's the reason, that's the main reason why you should really not do this. Of course, if you do it, well, it's up to you. It's your decision, but if you get into troubles for that, I'm not responsible for this, and you've been warned here that this is not something you should do. And last thing, please do not change the footer. The footer includes credits, it includes a link to my site, it includes the copyright, and what I mean by that is if you then look at your template, you will see on each page you have a footer, which is this, and as you will see later, you can change this text here, but please do not modify this. Okay, this is the only thing I asked for. It's something that just to give credits, and it's to spread the word around, and please do not change the copyright. The copyright should remain to media template, and please do not put your copyright here or delete this link or whatever. Just don't modify this middle section, please. And yeah, here's something about the wiki. If you want to contact me, there's several ways you can do that. You can either email me, that would be probably the best option because I'm on my email most of the time, even during the day, and if I just don't have the time to answer you, I will reply and just say, you know what, I know about you, I will reply tomorrow evening, but you will get a reply as soon as I can, and it's usually within, I don't know, few hours, really. However, before you contact me, you might want to have a look at the frequently asked questions section, which is here, and you can also look at one of these two forums that I mentioned here, although I sometimes post at other ones too, but here you can post your questions and either I or some other user might answer it, so that's another means of contacting me. Or you can use the contact form in the blog. So there's all sorts of ways of contacting me, and once you do, I often use Skype. So I don't have a webcam, but audio is fine, so I have a microphone. So in case you have some problems and it's difficult to actually solve it by email, because as you know, email, as you can imagine, is quite slow, and it can be difficult when you email back and forth. It's much faster to use Skype when we can talk to each other, and don't be afraid, even if you feel if you don't feel confident with talking to me in English, that's fine. I want to say that I'm not a native speaker either, so just don't worry. And Skype can be installed on any operating system, even mobile phones like Android or iOS. So if we're unable to solve the problems via email, then you can even talk to me. And I've talked to about half of the users, so it's always nice to get to know the other person, and that's an option too. So right now we're at the end of the first video, and in the next one we will continue. As I said, I recommend that you always read the wiki and you follow the wiki as I go through it in the videos. So these videos are basically just an addition to the wiki in case you don't understand something. But I highly recommend you rather use the wiki, read it, and then watch the videos, and then hopefully you understand what to do. But the videos on their own are probably not enough. So I don't talk about everything, and it's obviously easier if you can read it and you see examples here. And yeah, so let's just start with the installation, and we'll start by talking about the download, which is in the next video.